have this wonderful website in Canada called Progressive Money, and I'm looking. Sorry. He is the founder of the Progressive Money website, and he's going to discuss the deceptive language used by authorities when referring to money creation. For example, own funds and expanding the balance sheet, liquid facilities, ex nihilo to some degree, and simple denial. Jeff also reminded us that he's a reader and a thinker, but that he's kind of a light spirit, doesn't take himself too seriously, and insists that we should have some fun with monetary reform. So with that, I'm going to let Jeff just go right ahead.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I see thumbs up.
Okay. First, I want to thank Govert and Bo Young for this opportunity to speak with all of you. And the reason I chose this topic is because I think we need to be credible in the public's eyes. And by breaking down the veil of deceptive language, I think we can come closer to achieving this goal.
With some help, you turned it off by mistake.
Somebody needs to mute themselves. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, I'm just going to do some configuring here. I just actually left the meeting on Zoom. So can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, perfect. Okay, I'm just going to start right in. So you heard my preamble. So I posed this question to the Bank of Canada. Given that in the private sector, if I was to secure a loan at a private bank, the bank would create that money by typing it into their database. In essence, the bank would be creating new money. What restricts the amount of new money that can be created by a private bank? So the Bank of Canada responds, money creation refers to increases in money supply. Financial institutions are not given the right to create money. They are given the right to take deposits and make loans. The creation of money is what results from the cycle of deposit, loan, deposit, when it's repeated over and over. And again, this is a reference to the money multiplier, and I'll go into more into that later. And it is as dependent on people and businesses as on banks. That's true. It is therefore important to distinguish between the right to issue money, which is the sole right of the Bank of Canada, and the ability to create money, which, through legislation and regulation enacted by Parliament, is largely done by commercial banks through the taking of deposits and the issuing of loans. Banknotes issued by the bank represent only a small portion of money circulating in the economy at any one time, and that's true. So the bulk of the money supply consists of deposits that the public holds at financial institutions. The vast amount of money created in the economy is created by banks by lending out multiple times, and again, another reference to the money multiplier, with lending out multiple times the money Canadians deposit with them. So just to be clear, banks do not lend out deposits. And one of the most convincing thought experiments that negate that concept is anecdotal. For example, has your personal savings account ever inexplicably dropped, say like $1,000 or something like that? And then upon discovering this, you immediately went to the bank to find out why your account is short of funds, where the bank representative tells you, oh, don't worry, we're just lending out your deposit because you weren't using it at the time. And if this hasn't happened to you or anyone you know, that means that banks do not lend out deposits. The money must come from somewhere else. To continue on with the response by the Bank of Canada. So financial institutions can do this because they don't have to hold in their till more than a very small amount of cash sufficient to meet any day-to-day demands by the customers. True. And then at the end of this whole letter, they contradict the very first sentence in it by saying, the ability of commercial banks to create money through the issuance of loans is a key function of any banking system in a modern society. So that was my most successful admission that I was able to garner from the authorities. And anyways, in my reply, I say, when you state that financial institutions are not given the right to create money, I assume that you're referring to the government-sanctioned sole right of the Bank of Canada to produce banknotes or hard currency, which commercial banks don't have. On the Bank of Canada website in Backgrounders, Canada's money supply, at the top of the second page, it states that commercial banks and other financial institutions provide most of the assets used as money through loans made to individuals and businesses. In that sense, financial institutions create or can create money. Note, not hard currency, but electronic or digital money typed into databases. As I understand it, the cycle of deposit, loan, deposit, the money multiplier model, doesn't actually control the amount of money creation through the issuance of loans by commercial banks. So the limit of money creation is as dependent on people and businesses as on banks, as long as people are willing to take on loans and banks willing to grant them. Does my summation hold true? Bank of Canada, your summary seems to be consistent with the explanation we provided. I hope you were able to find all the information you were looking for. Please don't hesitate if you have any more questions. So, since then, the Bank of Canada has removed a couple of references regarding money creation, and one was the passage that I referenced. There was another one from the frequently asked question section of the website, and the question read, when referring to the 2007-2008 financial crisis, how should the Bank of Canada's liquid facilities be viewed? During the financial crisis, the Bank of Canada expanded its balance sheet by roughly 60% to provide exceptional liquidity. In other words, they created digital money to purchase toxic securities. So I want to talk a little bit more about the money multiplier. So the perception of the money multiplier model is also reinforced by our educational system, which still teaches the fractional reserve banking system and is the template for money creation. In Canada, prior to July of 1994, there were reserve requirements, meaning that commercial banks were required to hold a certain percentage of reserves relative to the amount of liability deposits, which is consistent with the money multiplier model in macroeconomic textbooks. However, empirical research initiated by Basil Moore in 1979 and later independently corroborated by numerous researchers, including Kidlin and Prescott, which did their analysis in 1990, confirmed an observation about how banks actually operate. The then senior vice president of the New York Federal Reserve, Alan Holmes, stated, the money multiplier model assumes that banks need excess reserves before they can make loans. The model process is that first deposits are made, creating excess reserves, and then these excess reserves allow loans to be made, which create more deposits. Each new loan reduces the level of excess reserves, and the process stops when this excess has fallen to zero. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the money multiplier model. But in reality, Holmes pointed out, banks create loans first, which simultaneously create deposits. If the level of loans and deposits then means that banks have insufficient reserves, then they get them afterwards, and they have like a 2-week period in which to do so. So the real world practicality of banking was that the time delay between deposits and reserves meant that the direction of causation flowed not from reserves to loans, but from loans to reserves. And that's enough on that. So now I'm just going to continue on another communication I had with the bank. So I asked the Bank of Canada, do commercial banks create money when purchasing securities on the primary market? Bank of Canada, a long story short, no. In a follow-up question, I asked, well, while commercial banks do employ the money creation process, giving them the benefit of the doubt, does the Bank of Canada use this process when acquiring treasury bills and bonds in non-competitive bids from the federal government? Bank of Canada. In reply to your follow-up question, no, we do not use the money creation process to buy government securities at auction. We use our own funds. So, I know this is patently untrue because of the published balance sheets and the fact that the Bank of Canada does not hold retained earnings like other financial institutions. So they don't have any extra capital floating around. The Bank of Canada is mandated to run in a neutral position and as a backstop for the commercial banking sector. Which leaves the question, where does the Bank of Canada get funds to purchase securities? Of course, as you know, the Bank of Canada simply creates digital money by typing numbers into a database and recording it via double entry bookkeeping. So on to purchasing programs. The title in and of itself implies, purchasing programs implies that one already has funds or a pool of money available to buy whatever one wishes to purchase. However, in the case of the Bank of Canada, we know this is not true. And further to this language thing, even people that would like to see the existing monetary system changed are guilty of creating a mystique around it. Instead of clearly and simply explaining the process, they feel a need to attach an exotic title to it. For example, ex nihilo, which all of you here know is Latin, meaning out of nothing. I mean, don't we want this information to be as accessible to as many people as possible? I mean, by saying money is created out of nothing, which everyone here knows is true, to the uninitiated, this creates immediate confusion. Because I think most of you here would agree that the average person sees money as something substantial. And how do you create something out of value, out of nothing? I mean, why not just say money creation starts with a few keystrokes on a computer? I think most people would be able to identify with that because everybody's worked with a word process. When you type in a key, it actually does something. So it's not really out of nothing. You're actually starting a process. And if their interest is so, my personal interaction with people regarding this, I had a meeting with a local bank manager just a few years ago, and I was honest about my motives for the meeting. I told her that I would be interested in, learning more about the loans process. So I walk into her office and I noticed numerous diplomas hanging on the walls. I mean, just covered. And I was quite impressed. However, when I started to question her about the money creation process, she became visibly uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And not because she was being deceptive in any way. Rather, she just didn't know the answers. Her reaction was analogous to a deer caught in the headlights of your car. I mean, she was trying her best, and to her credit, she referred me to an investor relations person at CIBC headquarters. My experience with him was different in that he denied that banks create money out of nothing and stopped responding to my queries. Lastly, recently I stopped by the local CIBC and asked for a personal loan application. Not that I needed one, but I was going to follow through and garner some more information. And currently, there is no such thing. It's all done via digital entries by the loans office, or you can actually do it online, but there is no actual paper application for loans anymore, at least at the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. And so I asked him if he knew where the money was coming from in order to loan it to me. And he had kind of a shocked look on his face. And he honestly responded, I don't really know from what pool of money it comes from. And I don't know, some kind of light switch went off in my head. I thought I was in the mood to do this before I went into the bank. And I just the way his face looked, what's the point? So I just said, well, I told him it's a very interesting process, thanked him for his time, and then I just left. So having said all that, is it any wonder that people have difficulty in grasping the concept of money being created through the loans process? I personally believe that in order to mobilize the average citizen, the first hurdle to overcome is to get them to accept the reality of the money creation process, then followed by the problems associated with it, which leaves us with the question, how does one do that? My own experience in sharing this information has basically three scenarios. Either they have no interest whatsoever, or they seem interested, and then you never hear from them again, or outright deny the reality of it. For example, I have a close friend, and whenever the subject of banking came up, I would chime in, of course. He would just get angry and go stomping out of the room when I tried to explain, how the process works and why it's a problem. But over time, his thought process has morphed from total denial to a grudging acceptance of it to now where he doesn't care and is not interested in talking about it. So, and I think, again, it's largely a result of conceptually, it's difficult for people to accept. And to steal a quote from John Kenneth Galbraith that you're all familiar with, the process in which banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled. Now, I will answer any questions you have, and hopefully most of you are still awake. I yield the floor.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Could I start by asking you a little bit what initiated your curiosity to do those things and ask those questions of the big bank?
Because I'm trying to get authorities to acknowledge how the money creation process works. And then, of course, once they acknowledge it, you say, well, you realize it's a big problem for many reasons. Mm-hmm. So that's because I don't know how you're going to convince, like, the average person walking down the street, how they're going to take your word over the authority's word, right? And right. The authority's word is mainly just silence on the topic. They just ignore it.
Okay, very good. So you already had your strong idea of what you were trying to do before you started this.
Yes.
Yeah. Who has another question for Jeff or a comment?
You want to look at the stack in the chat? It might be William.
I see Covert and Paul. First Covert, then Paul, please. You need to unmute. Please.
My mouse was not working. My mouse was not working.
I thought your mouth wasn't working.
Mouse. now the mouse. Now the mouse. I just want to add something that I read and a nice anecdote. Let's start with the anecdote. So in 2015 and 2016, after American Monetary Institute conferences, some of us went protesting at the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago. And at the corner there, we were giving out leaflets and little pamphlets. And there is a money museum inside the bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. So Nick Agnuds, who's not here tonight, and myself, we went inside. And you know, it looks all nice, and it happened so to be that there would be a little lecture by someone of the Federal Reserve Bank there. And so this lady came through, you know, telling us that lecture was coming up, and then we engaged her in conversation about money making and the money making creation process, and telling her, yeah, you know, we're doing a little protesting and informing people outside, and we explained to her, or Nick explained to her, what we thought was the, you know, the right theory of credit creation, and we were dumbfounded. The lady said, "Yes, we know that." And we were just like,
So she admitted it?
Yes, totally.
Okay. I have a parallel experience. I went to the Bank of Canada, to its museum, and they had absolutely nothing with regard to digital money or how the money creation process worked. Basically, they just had these models of flows, stocks and flows, but they didn't actually explain or show how money first comes into creation. And I talked to the curator at the time and kind of explained to them. And of course, they're mostly just frontline people, so they've been hired there to, you know, be a public relations person for the bank, so they didn't really know anything. But that's actually how I first got the document that explains the parliamentary library, the document that explains that money is created through the loans process, but also in purchasing securities. So it was actually fruitful, particular visit.
And I'm not saying that there was a display in that museum telling about the money-making process. It was just her, you know, direct, you know, saying, yes, we know. The other thing that I want to share here is a paper, and I'll try to find that one again and share it in the study stack, of a Swiss social scientist. I don't know if he was a sociologist or something, but he found out that Swiss bankers amongst each other talk about money and the money creation process quite differently than when they talk to the public. So amongst each other, he found out they talk about the money creation process according to the correct theory, the credit creation theory of banking. But to the public, they talk about, because they think, well, he didn't find out why they did, or one of the things was, well, it's more simple. They talk to the public as if banking, the correct banking theory is the intermediary theory, where there is first a amount of money before you can, you know, lend it out.
Well, you know what? I would love to see.
Like, yeah, go ahead.
I would love to see evidence of that. So if you ever got a hold of, say, a dialogue or a video of them actually talking or discussing the money creation process and then reverting back to the money multiplier model that's taught in textbooks, that would be significant. Yeah, because then you would have.
They're not talking about the money multiplier model. That one is not even, you know. So we're talking mostly about in three different theories. The intermediary theory, where you first need the money and then you can, you know, make loans. You got the multiplier, where you can, you know, you get a deposit and you can loan out 90%, and that becomes a deposit, and you can loan out 90% of that again, etc., etc., and that indeed creates money. And then you have the correct, you know, credit creation theory of banking, where the money is right away, boom, deposited in your account, and only at the end of the day, if they need a reserve, they'll go to their central bank and get the reserve. So they're not even talking about the multiplier. It's just amongst each other. They know the truth. Towards the public, they do as if the intermediary or the intermediation theory is the correct one. And one of the things this writer was talking about, well, don't make it too complicated for people, or it's not necessarily they don't need to know, but it's more like, well, you don't have to make it too complicated.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I would like to.
I'll share that paper.
Yeah, please do. I'll actually download that if I get an opportunity. So.
Very good, thank you. Paul, what were you going to say? And then I'll ask Mary Beth to put her question up.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience. This is the whole reason that the alliance was formed, was to find some way to break through and get the message out. Because, as you say, the resistance, it's almost inherent. People don't want to know the truth, which was shocking to me. But my experience was with Sarah Bloom Raskin. She's the wife of Jeremy Raskin, the very progressive congressman from Maryland. And I went to a public forum of his, and his wife happened to be there. And I walked up to her and I just started telling her about our organization and talked about how money was created and how banks create money. And honestly, she is a very honest person. She wasn't trying to, she did not know. She sits on the board of governors for the Federal Reserve. She heads the supposed environmental impacts of Federal Reserve policy, whatever that can be. But the ignorance is pervasive, and if somebody could get to the bottom of it, some of it, there may be some sinister, things going on behind the scenes that they really don't want the people to know. But I think the majority is that even the experts don't know how the system works. And
I'll actually give an example that applies directly to the United States that I came across when I read the book Too Big to Fail. So there's a passage in there. I'm paraphrasing here, but anyways, Barney Frank was a Democrat, and he was the chair of the House Financial Services Committee. And he was overheard, and this has been verified by numerous sources, that he kind of leaned over to Ben Bernanke when they're talking about the bailouts for all the banks and the insurance companies. And he asked them, he said, "Do you guys have enough money?" Which, again, screams of the ignorance of how the system works. And here's a guy who's the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, and he might have been chosen because he is so ignorant. But the fact that he asked Ben Bernanke, "Is there enough money?" So there's one for you, you happy Americans.
Very good. I see Stephen on the stack.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate what Govert said about that museum at the Chicago Fed not really explaining credit theory or explaining how money creation works. I've since around 2005, though, I've been an educator and I've taught some economics in various grade levels. And I was invited many times to go to the Fed as an educator and to learn things there and to get inspired. And I never did find out, or even though I would push, a deeper conversation, I never got a true response. And the closest I got was I was in a conference, and Ben Bernanke was taking our questions, and he was asked about the money creation process, and he was asked about the Fed creating money, and he was beginning to explain the dual circuit system, how the Fed can buy things, and that becomes like reserves. It's called other things too, like high-powered money. and that reserves and accounts can be turned around by the banking system for money to go out into circulation that they can create. And but he didn't quite get that far. Once he saw where he was heading with that thought, he stopped and he changed courses. But I was like reading his mind, or he was almost saying, explaining, how banking worked between the Fed and the banks, and then again, how, the banks and the public, and the dual circulation thinking mechanism, and which is more common in Europe than the United States. How we can think about money creation. He was almost spilling the beans, but no one else was, and I know he could spill the beans if he wanted to. But just a little note on that.
Excuse me, I put a couple of items in the chat box. One was about Werner. It's a terrific presentation by Werner on the overall process and banking and so forth. But he does actually mention where he followed a loan. He went in and did an experiment following a loan, and he makes it quite clear that the money didn't come from some pool of deposits. They just go ahead and do it and then figure it out later. And the second item I put in was something that I've read a few times, including from Kumhoff, references to both the Bank of England, well, I'm sure you folks know about them, and the Bundesbank on money creation. And there, there's a central bank saying 90% of the money is created by the banks, the private bank. Also, in my Kiwanis group, we have a senior banker and a wealth manager, and I put to them this question a few times, and they said, "Well, of course we create money. There's never enough actual deposits, savings, so we have to create some more credit." And one last question. I see the word stack in the chat a couple times.
Yeah.
What does that refer to?
That means that's like people raising their hand to say something.
Ah, okay. Sorry about that.
So that was the last thing, Joe?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I see John Howell on the stack, followed by Sue.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Jeff for sharing this. I had a similar experience at a lower level in our local bank and went and asked these kind of questions and got the denial from the CEO, who is a fine man, because he's convinced that he doesn't create money when he makes loans. Mm-hmm. And convinced because that's what he learned in his economics classes. And we also then talked to the people at the credit union. And the CEO of the credit union had no idea of anything that we were asking about, but he had the wisdom to bring in a chief financial officer who was very savvy about the whole system. And he did not deny that banks create money when they make loans. And I remember one of his last comments, because we were talking about the fact that the present system tends to concentrate wealth in a dramatic fashion, and this is the center of this is this process of money creation, and all he did was to say, yeah, capitalism hasn't done a very good job in wealth distribution. Well, that was a
very honest answer.
From a banker, that's good. But the fact of the reference of the first banker to his economics courses, I think tells you where some of this is coming from. This is the story that's taught in economics courses, as the Rethink Economics people in Europe have been telling us. And that my conversations with economists in our local university, at least one of them, actually, I wanted to talk to him, and he put the article from the Bank of England, the McLay article, in front of me, saying, "Yeah, banks create money." So at least there's some dents perhaps being made, but boy, until we change the educational system, because bankers come through taking courses in economics, until we get something there, it's going to be hard to change that thought processes that goes on in these bankers. The first banker, I think he was absolutely honest. He denied that he created money because I think that's really what he believes.
Can I answer this?
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. And that is one of the reasons why I went back to school, is to take economics courses after reading Steve Keen's Debunking Economics, to find out for myself. And I was lucky that I had a professor that was open to new ideas, as long as and that's the beautiful thing about academic circles, is you're going to find people that are critical thinkers, which means they're open to changing their minds, right? They're not as dogmatic as most people. So he actually let me get up in front of all of his classes and speak, completely contradicting what was taught in macroeconomic textbooks. And of course, everything that I say is backed up by information that I get mostly from the Bank of Canada and the Department of Finance too. But he was really receptive. And I told him, I says, listen, I'm going to challenge you. Like, when you're teaching this, we're going to get to the part of the course, I can't remember what chapter it was, chapter 8 or something like that. And I said, you're going to start to teach this fractional reserve banking system. And again, to a previous member's point, when they were talking about the intermediate, the theory of money and intermediation, well, that's all part and parcel with the money multiplier model, the way it's taught in macroeconomic courses anyway. So anyways, so I warned him, and I slowly kind of gained his trust. And I would go to his office and, have you thought about this and the information that I've given you and stuff? But again, you get that same reaction, right? You get that vacant look in their eyes. Because, I told him about front, so listen, I'm going to be challenging you on the money creation process. And I know you guys have been teaching this thing for 20 years, but you've been teaching it wrong for 20 years. And of course, you can't just come up to somebody and say that without them knowing you, or have some kind of personal connection with them first, because they'll just kick you out of their office. Like, they'll close down. They'll just become polarized. So this is another reason why I chose this topic, is that to listen to your ideas about how you can do this, and to make this fun, just meet people and let's question how the system works. But we got to somehow, I don't know, it's got to be enjoyable somehow, because this will just suck the life out of you. Just always it's like beating your head against the wall. Like, you just never seem to get anywhere, it seems. Anyways, I'll yield the floor.
Thank you very much. I see Sue on the stack, and I wonder if after Sue, Mary Beth would say what she wrote. Go ahead, Sue.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's nice to meet you.
Well, thank you.
I mean, I've been aware of the Comer lawsuit for many years with Rocco Galati as the lawyer. And I'm wondering how much of that you know about, and what effect you feel it's had in spreading the information.
I used to be very intimate with it, and I don't know, I could recognize kind of flaws in the lawsuit, in that the Bank of Canada, if you read the Bank of Canada Act, it's very general, the way it's worded. And there were a group of economists, I think, co-signed, over 100 economists co-signed that the Bank Act should be rewritten to reflect modern times in the banking system. Of course, it just fell on flat ears. But Comer, I tried to get a hold of them several times, and they just don't reply to emails. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's me or something. I don't know, but they just would never reply to anything that I even offered to, is there any way that you need help? And, can I come on board? What are you guys doing? All this kind of stuff, but never get a response. So, and I also talked to a former member recently, and he said it's kind of dead in the water right now. And I don't know if you're involved with Comer at all, but maybe you could fill me in if you have any kind of inside information as to what's going on with Comer.
Let me just clarify for people who are new here. Comer is an organization in Canada, similar to the Alliance for Just Money in the United States. It's much older though. It's Canadian organization for, I'm not sure where to go, but that's what we're talking about, this Canadian organization, Comer.
Yeah,
Go
it's
ahead.
actually,
Cool.
hey,
Stephen
Mary?
or
Yeah,
Jeff?
it's actually the Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform.
There we go. Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform. Thank you. So Sue, I know you had a follow-up question.
Well, I just wanted to say to Jeff, I haven't talked to them in a couple years. And who was the name of the woman who was the leader of it?
And Emmett.
Ann Emmett. Is she still alive? Is she still active?
I don't know. Like I've really stopped following Comer because, again, let's just say, you know, I mean, if the lawsuit did become successful, still you have to sell it to the public, and I don't see any of their activities that's actually geared towards establishing any kind of grassroots uprising, I guess you could call it, but because if there's no way that this is going to change from the top down. There's in any kind of revolution, it always comes from the bottom up because, and it's pretty simple reason too. I mean, the system is so advantageous to the financial elites at the top. There's no reason for them to change the existing system.
Right. Well, Ann Emmett, I know. I have her phone number somewhere because I once talked to her on the phone, and she loves to talk about this stuff. I mean, she's got all this energy. But I think also part of their strategy was not just that this was going to change the system, but using that lawsuit as a way to get the information out about what money is. And similar to, you know, when we're trying to talk about the Need Act in this country, you know, to give the true nature of money, of what's going on, more of, you know, that's a vehicle to educate people.
I agree with that premise. I don't see any evidence that that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thanks to Jerome for the note he put about Paul Samuelson's economics textbook from 1980. The more in detail that it acknowledges that private banks do create money, but it misleads by maintaining that the bank money creation is limited to some multiple of reserve balances. So talking about the detail of what economics students are taught.
Can I add to that?
Well, go ahead, and then Mary Beth, and then Paul.
You can go all the way back to his very first text in 1948, and I can send you a link to that. He used the goldsmith example, which I saw in the chat, F suggested. I'm not sure who F is. And he says directly that money is created out of thin air by the banks in that 1948 version, along all the ones since. He says in there that there are many who question the prerogative of doing that it really is the prerogative of the government. So he was from, I think he went to the University of Chicago where the Chicago plan was developed, and some of his teachers were those people. So he was well aware of that stuff. Also, I'll add that in 1936, Fisher's early pamphlet on 100% money and public debt refers to the Goldsmith bankers as well. And he does a very nice job in the 30 pages talking about the issues that Jeff did. And by the way, Jeff, this is Joe Polito. Congratulations on a great presentation.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I want to give those congratulations too. So Mary Beth, you had another idea about this? And you are unmuted. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, I said two things. I don't know which one you want me to say. One is, I think most people feel that while some of what we say may be true, even if it is true, first of all, how can we ever change such a monolithic industry? And secondly, why would we trust the government to do this rather than the banks. I've actually had people say, well, at least, you know, corporations are efficient.
Can I answer that?
Well, let her finish the question and then yes, please. Is there more to it,
Okay.
Mary Beth, or not?
Well, I think in order to speak about this effectively to the public, we have to fall back on that advertising principle, sell the sizzle. Don't bother so much with the detail. Make it available to people who really want to delve into it. They're not going to be very many. And promote instead the advantages for people and their families. What do they gain by monetary reform? And we're all about here talking about how big a secret this is and how much of a conspiracy it is not to admit that this is how it works. Let's think about why, what it is they're afraid of, and address that instead of going down the rabbit hole of trying to prove them wrong.
Thank you.
I like that question. In fact, that is actually the way I'd like to move forward is, and that she states it perfectly, and I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but
Mary Beth Gardam.
Mary Beth, okay. Yeah, and because, yeah, I just drew a blank here. Because, my website, the way I have it designed, and now I feel that it's more or less complete, starts out with a proposal. And in the proposal, it mentions the advantages to monetary reform succinctly. And the details are very few and far between. But if you want to pause the video, there's all kinds of references to how it would improve the system. And it's a little short 4-minute video. So I totally agree. That's the way we should kind of move forward, is just to explain the advantages of allowing the government, as you said. Again, this is a common question, how the government can't be trusted, right? Like, I can't understand that, except that it usually comes from right-wing ideology, is that, the government's bad, the government's evil. The government is us. If we actually had proper representation in, the halls of parliament, that people that actually represented us and our interests, then, I would have no problem having the Bank of Canada create all the money. And then we would truly have a system that was intermediate, where we'd have banks would just be moving money from one place to another. And I outlined that in the video, but I do it all within 4 minutes. And most people should be at least get the general idea of, yeah, that would be better than it is now. But again, that's a very common question. They say, yeah, but can we really trust the government? But you're okay with trusting privately owned commercial banks? They're allowed to create money out of nothing with their only motive is profit. You trust them?
Could you post the video that you're describing, please?
Oh, the URL of it. Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. You can actually go directly to the website. It's right on the front page.
What's the website?
Oh, Progressive Money Canada?
Progressive Money Canada. Yep.
Yeah, you can just punch it in your browser. It'll come up. Or else if you want to go directly, like with the address bar, it's progressivemoney.ca.
Very good. Thank you.
And then you'll see what the actual proposal is. And that's why I'm really comfortable with the website right now, because the proposal's on the front page and it does it very quickly. And then everything that follows as you go left to right along the header bar supports that argument.
Right. Paul, I think you had a comment to make or a question.
I do. So for me, the reason I'm in this organization is the education part. I mean, the theory, it's completely understood, and it's good that we can lay it all out. But one thing we as educators on monetary reform never, ever address is the psychology of money. I've never seen that addressed anywhere. We are ingrained with what money means in so many different ways from when we're toddlers, that we start off our conversation with the word creation of money, not realizing most people don't understand that money is created. So right there, we're already past them. We've lost their attention, their eyes glaze over, because the creation of money, it doesn't mean anything to them. And so us, down on our knees begging them to understand that it's not good for banks to create money, we've already lost them. And I don't really know how to get to that deeper, ingrained, subconscious understanding that people have. Everybody understands money, it's part of their life. And unless we address that first, I don't think we're going to break through. I don't know how, but
I actually, I addressed that in my little speech, I guess. In that, yes, it is very difficult to get them to acknowledge, but it's worse if you just say money's created out of nothing.
right.
And I made the point that, well, you could start with, okay, it starts by just typing numbers into a database. If you explain it that way, I've found, like with a few people, and again, my experience is so limited because you get so few people actually listening to you, but they found it much more receptive that, okay, now I kind of get that because computers can do anything. Yeah, you just type numbers into a database. Anyway, that's my idea, but I'm interested in hearing you guys and what ideas you have. But you're so right. The topic is just repellent, and it's very difficult to get people to talk about it. That's why I'm thinking, how do you do this? You got to make it, you almost have to make it like, hey, it's cool to be in monetary reform. It's hip, we're the in crowd. Like, I really don't know how to do it either, but that's what I'm going to be attempting to do locally. And that's another thing that I want to do is I want to get a group of people locally that meet. And I'm doing it kind of under the premise of just making the world a better place, and we'll have discussions, but actual monetary reform will be kind of secondary. It'll mostly be people getting together to commune and discuss issues and in a non-combative way. And then hopefully the group will grow, and then we'll be able to get a bunch of other groups. But to me, there has to be that, for me personally, it has to be that one-on-one communication where you can see the person's eyes, you're actually interacting with them. To me, I get energy from that. Doing all these, this is good, speaking to all of you folks, but if we're all in a meeting together, I would be much more energized, just having people present, a human thing.
Jeff, have you thought of for getting your group together and keeping it a little bit on track? Have you thought of using the book circle structure where you all read something and discuss it?
We haven't done that. Basically, we get together just to mainly to hope that everybody's okay, and it's more of a social thing. But they'll ask questions, and I have explained how the money creation process works, so they're interested in it. But once it's explained a lot, even when it's explained, people become very intimidated because people don't want to feel stupid. They want to feel like, well, I know what money is. There's a $5 bill. I can go buy stuff with it. That's as far as it goes with most people. So I'm at a loss. I'm at my wit's end as far as like, how do you get people, like everybody, like all of you guys know, that to get a lot of people involved, you got to kind of do it like almost under the radar, do something that's fun. And monetary reform is a secondary issue, but sneak in things every now and then, like how important it is for us to be able to control the money supply. And again, some people will bring up like that question about, oh, you don't trust the government. I trust my government way more than I trust corporations, because I know what corporations, and it's not because corporations are evil. It's because they're mandated. to make as much profit as they possibly can, and they're beholden to their shareholders and whatever company mandates there are. So it's not evil. It's just the way this system is so perversely set up. They've been given this huge privilege to create money and profit off of it. And we don't get any of that benefit. That's why I advocate that, yeah, we got to take the money creation process away from privately owned commercial banks. And we need to have the Bank of Canada create the money, and then we decide where money's going to flow into our economy through referendums. It's just one idea, but it could be done in a number of different ways.
Well, that's nice. Jeff is putting out a question kind of to everybody here. What other good ideas? What has worked for you? I will say that among some of the people I know here and myself, it had to be, I would never have gotten interest. I went many decades with that exact attitude of resistance. Don't even talk to me about it. Nothing I can do about it. And I got more interesting stuff in my mind. But what brought me to it was personal experiences in my own life that got connected with this issue. And once the connection was made, I'm kind of a diehard now. And I think there's other people like that too, that something personal in their very own experience, there's a little click that can go off the, the money. And I'm not sure how to help people find those situations or not, but I wonder what other ideas people have for Jeff and for all of us to try to help people become open to this topic. Mary Beth, and then is someone else, Mark, and then Judith. Go ahead.
I think that tying it, at least initially, to the idea of debt can be effective, because nobody likes debt, and really very few people understand it. And trying to explain this monetary system through the lens of debt may be a good hook for us.
Explain it through the what? Through the lens of debt. You said through the lens of debt. Okay, go ahead. And then it's going to be Mark Young. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so I've used that route, and it can be effective, of course, because then you can get them to think about the money creation process when people are in debt because of mortgages, and you can introduce it. And I've done this many times as well. You know where the bank got that money from for your mortgage, and then you get kind of an in that way. But I'm looking for something, not just a hook, but something that creates longevity. So I think we all know that we're all in this for the long haul. I'm actually going to go on a sabbatical in about a month, but I'll always come back to it just because it's so important. I can't think of anything more important. It doesn't matter what you're really concerned about, the environment, the climate, all those things, their paths are determined by where money flows. Money rules everything, unfortunately. That's why I say we as a people should have more, control of it. So to illuminate that information on the public, well, that's what we're all here for.
Right. Very good. Mark Young, what did you want to add?
I wanted to add just that from the standpoint of how we reach people, I agree with what Mary Beth posted in the chat, and that I think oftentimes we want people to understand money, and I don't think that's the driving force behind people wanting change. I think it's improving their personal lives and what means something to them to better their lives. So if I'm trying to reach people, is one of the reasons why we're doing the position papers is to do exactly that and to try different ways of reaching people. The banking talk and reserves and all that stuff will just glaze people over. And many people, like I think also like Mary Beth indicated, they don't really care who makes the money. It doesn't really matter to them. They don't, whether it's a private bank or whether it's the government, I don't get the feeling that people really care about that who makes it. They just care about how it affects them. And so I think if we use monetary reform and think about it in a creative way, and take out all our own biases and everything else, then there is something in there for everybody. Even the corporate financiers, large businesses. If you think about it from the standpoint that there are 7 billion people on the earth, and really only a couple of billion participate in a modern economic society, that means that there is a lot of business out there for business people. There's a lot of stuff to be done. If you speak at it from a standpoint of how can I lower corporate taxes, or how can I reduce taxation on people, that interests people. If you speak on it from the standpoint of debt and deficits and how we can make a balanced, a monetarily balanced anyway, government, and not have to have all these conversations about how we pay for stuff. To me, that's a much more interesting topic. And like I said, and is one of the reasons why we're pursuing the position paper. So that was my comment.
Mark, I completely and absolutely agree with you. And again, this is why I created this video, the same one that I referred to when I was talking to Mary Beth. So if you go to the front page of the website, it's like a short 4-minute video, and that's what it does. It's really designed to just sort of introduce money creation, but it quickly goes on to why it's a problem and how the population will benefit by it.
Yeah,
and one thing,
good video. I've seen it.
Oh, okay. What did you think?
I thought it was great. I think we shared it around inside some of the Alliance groups, actually. But I thought it was a very straightforward, easy to understand video. Matter of fact, I sent it to Govert because he was creating I don't know, Govert has all these lists of stuff. He was doing one for videos, and I said, this is a very good video you should include. He can tell you exactly what the name of it is, but I can't remember. But yeah, so I loved the video. I thought it was great.
Okay, that's good to hear. Because basically everything that everybody's commented on so far is really kind of in the direction of that video. And like you said, let's talk about how to improve the world, the planet, climate change. How are we going to fund climate change? And then that's kind of a segue into anybody that wants to get deeper in it. But you're right. Most people they're not interested. I don't care. As long as I've got $5, I can buy stuff with it. People never give it a second thought. They don't think about its origins or its value or anything. They just, as long as they can get stuff, that's all they care about. And that's the majority of people. So that's why I think just what we're doing here, and I was looking forward to this. And it's too bad the camera blinked out.
Yeah. But can you see us?
Sorry?
Can you see us?
No, I just clicked right off because there was feedback from the phone.
Right. You're on the telephone, yeah. So Jeff, have you seen, there's another website with a title, How We Pay. And it has 2 good videos on it that I would recommend if you have not seen, and well, others here too, but it sounds like it's kind of right down your alley, Jeff. It's howwepay.us, and the creator of that website is here with us tonight too. It's Virginia.
Okay.
Right now, Sue is on the stack.
All right.
Hi. Well, one thing I had a lot of fun doing, which I would suggest to you, is that Mary lives in Wisconsin, and she there's a local radio show there. So myself and Howard, another monetary reformer, was interviewed by Mary. It was really a lot of fun. So I think reaching out to your local radio and seeing if you could get on it, maybe even get your own show for that matter, that would be great. And it would be fun, you know. And the other thing was I'm in the different grassroots groups here in New York with different issues. And I slowly introduce it. It's almost like people, I say something about what's going on with our issue, and the people will ask me, oh, why do you think that? And that's a way of introducing how money is affecting what all these people are, this grassroots. So they're very involved with what they're working on. But they don't see the core power. And so that's another way, but that you have to do, you know, gradually, because people are very, you know, their energies are very focused, you know. But that's another way I found is very, very helpful.
Pointing
Yeah.
out that money is the bottleneck for whatever it is you want.
Yeah, but you have to, this is one grassroots group. I mean, we're fighting, we have a deadline, you know, and, but people periodically have gotten interested, and I'm, you know, I have to do some research to give them something, you know, that they can just use to think about, you know. Yeah.
I have two more, well, there's a couple comments here on the chat too. But I would like to go back to the minute where we were talking about how nobody likes debt and debt could be a lead-in for some people. And I wonder if the fact that a lot of us, if we have any savings, let's say if we have a retirement account, and we realize that that's money where someone, that's money on deposit somewhere where someone owes us, where we are the creditors, does that make people, does that push people away from wanting to think about debt? You know, nobody wants to owe, but we also don't want our little nest egg to be messed with. Jeff, what do you think?
I've never actually come across that. But I think I understand what the concern
I
is.
wondered about that. Others might haven't thought about that. And the other thinking about debt that I wonder what people on this call would say about, you know, how to talk about it. The amount of our cost of living, which is debt, which is because someone had to borrow that money sometime. Is that a topic that can be brought up in a helpful way, or does that just get too confusing too quickly, or what do we think about that?
Well, I think this actually goes back to Mark's point too, that most people aren't really interested in these processes. People only care if they can get money and save money. So, and banks are pretty reliable with regard to that. So like nothing's ever crazy happened to my accounts with the CIBC. And I'm sure you feel pretty secure with your banking. And plus we do have deposit insurance. You have your own, the Federal Reserve insures, or there's some kind of insurance company that reserves your, or covers your deposits. We have the Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation that covers up to $100,000 in each of your savings accounts. So it is pretty safe. Like when we put our money into the bank, it's pretty safe, but it's not entirely safe. And again, it's
right. But when we're talking about changing the debt money system, then I think that makes people nervous.
Say that again.
But when we're talking about changing the debt money system,
oh well,
I've encountered that makes people nervous.
Oh, well, it does. You're absolutely right. It makes them nervous. And again, I refer back to the video. So I addressed that in that video, and that it really doesn't change anything for you and I.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I don't see anyone else on the staff.
I have a comment on what you just said.
Go ahead, Mark.
I think again, that's one of those things that require us to, and then Gobert's on the stack actually, to rethink how we look at stuff, right? And that we have to be creative, and it's like we assume that Social Security will move forward as it is now, and maybe they'll have a UBI attached to it or something. But is there really a need for Social Security under monetary reform? What if somebody just made whatever they made when they retired? Your retirement age 65, whatever money you're earning then, that's what you just get for your golden years to live it out. I think we have to be a little bit more creative in how we're talking about this stuff. And also going back again to the position papers, is how do we frame this information? There are a lot of retirees out there. I know my grandmother probably gets, $700 a month to live on. So I'm always having to, help her out or help out my mother do stuff. those issues are very, very important to people. And if you can say, and this also goes back to the thought process that Paul was talking about and how people think about money. We don't even know how people respond if they didn't have to worry about retirement, right? If you don't have to worry about a savings because you know the monetary system that we built is going to take care of you once you retire, then you don't need to worry about that nest egg. And so I think it's all in how you present it. So
Good point. I get that. Go ahead,
totally,
Jeff, then Hobart. Go ahead.
okay. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And if people have looked into this system as deeply as I have, they will come to realize it is such a convoluted mess. I publish a video on the money creation page of the website explaining, as I dissect capital adequacy requirement ratios, which is the amount of capital bank. Instead of actual cash or reserves, they have to have a certain amount of capital relative to the amount of liability deposits. So, but it is a convoluted mess. It is so illogical in the way it's set up, but it's meant to do that. It's meant as a veil to disguise people manipulating numbers, and whoever's manipulating the numbers, it's advantageous to them. And again, I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I look at this thing. If you have like 15 minutes or so, just watch my video. It's kind of painful just sitting there listening to me, because I'm basically reading off a document that I produced and the research that I actually did in the capital adequacy requirement ratios. And what I came up with is hopelessly complicated. But there's got to be, it doesn't have to be. We don't even need that. But this whole system has been created. And then you start talking about derivatives and financial instruments that are also complicated. And I have many books that I've read on the topic that I could refer to. But it is hopelessly complicated. CEOs of companies and banks don't even know how their financial instruments work. It's always some kind of guy with a mathematical degree in engineering that designs these things. And it's just a kind of an advanced form of gambling. So that's why I try to simplify everything on the website. And then if they want to go into the deeper waters, then they will discover that, yeah, this thing's hopelessly complicated. Go ahead. We could create a much simpler system. And with reference to Mark's mother, who's getting like only $700 a month, there's no reason why we couldn't, through a mandate from the people, say, okay, pensions will always be covered. We'll create new money. And that's actually a stimulant to the economy, as opposed to right-wing ideology. They're thinking. When you give somebody in the bottom 20%, if you give them money, they spend it almost right away. And that actually stimulates the economy.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Joel to say something about money, wealth, and social change.
I think the biggest reason it all seems so complicated is because we're very confused about money and wealth. Money, this thing that's only supposed to be a tool, yet is running the show, and wealth, the very goods and services that we're drowning in and can't distribute for lack of money. So what does that mean? Food's an abundant renewable resource. Global agribusiness is one of the most powerful industries on the planet and wants more customers. People can't be a customer without a number under their name in a computer called money, but we invented money to match buyers and sellers. So literally it's a form of insanity. College desks empty more than they're full. Grocery aisles empty more than they're full. You can't name anything that free enterprise hasn't figured out how to produce beyond what people could ever consume. And yet we're letting our notion of money stand in the way of distributing goods and services. And it's exactly the same. And I put a 10-minute video into the chat, last thing to just go in, that explains that money innovation, improving money itself, is part and parcel of all economic history and all economic paradigm shifts, but it's not even a discipline of economics. So what does that mean? Barter to gold coins based on smelting, to paper currency based on printing, to credit cards and e-commerce based on computers and the internet. But we're not asking the question, if money isn't serving anybody, business or communities, and blaming rich people is a form of insanity. Not only did they not invent the current system, everybody on the planet inherited it, but there isn't a rich family alive on the planet, no matter how rich, that can eat enough food to cause one person to go hungry, that can live in a big enough home to cause one person to be homeless, that can in any way consume enough healthcare or education for anyone to go without. So we're actually right in there in this conversation with the whole rest of the world, missing the whole point that we're drowning in the goods and services that people want and need. And all that's missing is money, our own invention, because it's so old-fashioned and outdated. And I just have, no, I'll let it go at that. So please check. I couldn't find some of you on LinkedIn while we've been sitting and talking. So if you'd reach out to me, JOELHODROFF on LinkedIn, I will share a few interesting links and maybe be a presenter here sometime, because this is some outside the box thinking, but I promise it's much less complicated than trying to fix a completely broken and irreparable system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those of us who are paying attention to agricultural parity pricing for raw materials, we focus on the difference between money and wealth. And we will be eager to hear more about that. Two people are on the stack, Hobart and then, Joe Polito, and Hobart and Paul.
All right, I'll keep it fast because
Go ahead, Hobart.
we got 10 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, just putting out the idea to make another list. This one of, if people want to compose spiels, presentations between 50 and 150 words, and send it to me. And I'll find some editors.
You said to propose presentations for the coffee house?
No, just compose something between 50 and 150 words in which you do the spiel, the presentation, your logic.
Oh.
You know, draw from your memory where, you know, when you talk with other people about, you know, how to present monetary reform. All of us have tried it. So if you can, you know, collect them, put them on a page, read them, get ideas out of it, that might help each other, you know, finding ways to communicate the basics.
Oh, thank you. Are you talking about what we sometimes refer to as the elevator speech? If you get
yes, the elevator speech.
For 2 minutes, what would you say?
Between 50 and 150 words.
Okay, very good. 50 to 100.
So I'll put my email address in the study stack with this request, because I know a lot of people here will have done it before, and I'll repeat that somewhere else. Second, how many people know Spanish-speaking people here on this Zoom?
I actually know a bit of Spanish.
Okay. Mark Young, myself, and a Mexican translator have just published. I'll show it, see what's the democratization of money, the introduction to monetary reform. It is a compilation of articles that we published from English into Spanish. There's Kumhoff, McLee, Zarlenga, Eknats, Mark Young is in there, David Graeber, Kumhoff, Mary Mellor, Joseph Huber. $16. This is our outreach towards the Spanish-speaking world. If I'll, again, in the study stack, I'll let you know more about this. And the third point, I don't know anymore, so that's it.
Thank you. Franz, were you trying to get on the stack?
Yeah, what about it? I made a couple of comments, and one of them, I think, in terms of education, I think the importance of story is really important. And when people have to understand, if you want people to understand, what money creation is, then you try to give an example of fractional reserve system. And so you can tell a very nice story about what Goldsmith were doing in the Middle Ages. And that was basically the beginning anyway of the fractional reserve system, which, unlike Jeff, I think when you compare fractional reserve system with the multiplier effect, I think that is really in two different areas. It might be a little confusing. My second point is, and I put it in the stack too, if we talk about the confusing situation and the instability of the monetary system, it's unjust, and because it is unjust and unsustainable, therefore it is complicated. It need not to be too complicated. If you read the book by Kelton, then about the money debt myth, then you see that one version of the MMT is rather straightforward. But the ultimate challenge for us is not only getting people to understand in our circles and in our nation, we really have to put our view to the larger picture. And so one of the questions I put in the chat box for Jeff, to see what he would think about removing the IMF and the World Bank, and also their Chinese counterpart, because you have a counter monetary infrastructure but in China. So what do we have to do with our money theories and actions to have a global system that is workable for everyone, global North and global South?
I would like to answer that question, but Mary, is his question in the chat? Because I'm not online, but can I access that in the stack following this meeting?
I think Bo Young can email it to you.
Yeah, any questions that people have, they can forward them to me, like through email, then I can give a proper response.
Maybe you would like to have the whole chat copied and emailed to you. Would that be helpful?
That would be helpful, but it'd be easier actually if just specific questions that were unanswered.
Okay, well,
this is really what I'm looking for.
This one is at 8:40, Bo Young. It was at 8:40. Okay, thank you for that question. Now, Paul is on the stack and so is Sue, and we're getting down on time. Who would like to wrap this up? Paul or Sue or both of you?
Well, I can be short. I don't know if it's wrapping. This is impossible to wrap up.
Go ahead, we'll let Sue wrap
A lot of loose ends. So I just want to say to Joel, we are steeped in the difference between money and wealth. We have been commanded to read Frederick Soddy from the 1920s, where he very clearly lays out that money is not wealth. But I'm here to learn how to communicate to people. We're a little bit too timid. I believe that not only can we suggest ways to maybe get free healthcare or the Green New Deal, but maybe take a more provocative approach and say, we're never going to get those things until we reform the money system, and see what people's reactions to that statement is. Because I firmly believe that's true, that we will not achieve all of these hopes and dreams that many of the advocates have out there. And have you tried that at all, being a little bit more provocative?
I've tried that in the past. And it does get people's attention, but at the same time, it kind of turns some people off too. But it's absolute. Your statement is absolutely true. I mean, if we controlled the money supply, then we could put money into anything that we thought was a benefit to the public. And again,
Right.
that's what this whole the website's about. And that's why I start the front page with a very clear explanation of what it could be. I mean, it could really be a panacea. Whereas because the thing is hopelessly complex now, like the banking and financial system, with the exception of money creation, by the way, the actual simplest process that they have is when they first create the money.
Right.
But everything that happens after that is just an increasing layer of complexity. Every time there's some kind of a measure of money as it goes through the system. And I outlined this in Money Creation. It's a long, pretty boring video, but I do make some legitimate points. And it's worth listening to for like 14 minutes or whatever it is, because I've actually dissected what comprises the capital adequacy requirement ratios. So it's actually a very valuable thing to look at, because once you realize how ridiculously complex it is, you'd have to change that, but nobody will be interested in talking about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Sue, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to say, people should read this book, The Lost Science of Money. It's a history. And when you get into all the details of the current system and people get confused, the history is much simpler to tell them. Pick out a piece of the history and just tell them the history, because that makes the present understandable. How do we get here? And I put in the chat, I taught this book privately, and I developed for each chapter, there's 24 chapters, all the teaching materials. And you can use them. You can find a piece of the history of money that particularly interests you and go and try to share that. But this, Stephen was a humanist, and this is written to help humanity. Yeah.
Very good.
There is actually one more thing I'd like to add with regard to the fella that was asking the question before when he brought up the deficit myth. So I've published a critique on modern monetary theory and the deficit myth. And that's what actually I was going to actually extend this to go over it. I guess I'll just go over it if you're listening. I'll just email you the information. So I have a statement from the Department of Finance. It took me a long time. Long story short, of course, I had to remind them a bunch of times. But I did get a statement from them saying that the government doesn't spend anything in its accounts until it's financed first, meaning that they sell bonds and treasury bills to get those funds. And that's how new money comes into being, outside of the money creation process and in the private sector. So it's very specific. And what it does is it completely contradicts the Stubbs hypothesis. I don't know if many of you are familiar with it, but it's the idea that government spend first and then taxes and borrowing follow. And MMT has a bunch of just bizarre concepts. They flipped everything on its head, like taxes don't pay for anything. But they've never produced. And Govert put this challenge out into, I think, on your website and also on the American Monetary Institute website, whereas they said, can any of you MMT guys come up with any documentation that proves that the government spends first, like through balance sheets or any kind of financial sheet that shows that they actually spent the money first and then they subtracted or got money from banks later? It's got everything ass over tea kettle, and they've got no proof to support it. Whereas I have a ton of proof. I have also statements by the Department of Finance, and in that their annual financial report shows you how the funding is financed after taxes and revenues don't fill that gap. So that's very critical. But because that brings to another point, I'm sorry I might be running over time here, but that comes to another point of how successful MMT has been, is because, they had a core group, and I can't remember, Missouri or somewhere, I can't remember where they all originated from, but they all got together, and they're all kind of smart people, and they started with a premise, and they just built on it, and that just became incredibly successful. And people talk about modern monetary form like it's this really genius thing, but they've got everything ass over tea kettle. Anyway, that's for you, Govert, and we're probably getting close to time, but I'll keep talking if you allow me to.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Does anyone, let's see, we are going to have to say goodnight here pretty soon, but there might be someone who hasn't said anything who would like to say a word as we sign off. I'm looking at you, Rick O'Neill, or you, Judith Furster. Do you care to contribute any comment?
Hi, I'm just really glad I had a chance to listen to the discussion. These are the kind of things I've been thinking about recently. For example, suppose I would be interested in giving a little talk to some people, half a dozen people or so locally about these kind of things. Well, I'd have to, you know, deal with how do you communicate these things to people that they've never heard about before. We hear about all kind of things in the news, you know, like police or you know, inequality. The 8 richest men or whatever it is own more than, you know, half of the rest of us. But there's no, you have to explain why all these you know, things about the monetary system really matter to people. So this is a really crucial topic. So I'm glad I had a chance to tune in.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks.
Thank you. And I want to give thanks to Jeff for being our speaker tonight. I really appreciated his comments and the conversation that they generated. And I want to thank everybody else who attended. To me, it was all very interesting and I learned a lot. I look forward to seeing some of you again. Some of you will be speakers at maybe future coffee houses. That would be good.